Hello, class. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a paper I wrote for findings in sport, hospitality, entertainment, and event management. It's called Disney, Netflix, and Amazon Oh My, Analysis of Streaming Brand Competition and the Impact on the Future of Consumer Entertainment. For the last about 10 or 15 years, streaming competition has been increasing. However, over the last 2 years, we've seen an incredible increase in this competition and the amount of companies entering the streaming space, and also the amount of resources being spent by these companies to support these streaming services. And so when that happens, and there's this type of competition that is always increasing, you see a lot of rivalries forming and or evolving based on the streaming competition and based on previous relationships between these companies and between these brands. To better understand this, we need to look at competition and rivalry. So first, competition occurs when two groups are compared and compare against each other, either directly or indirectly. Now, those competitions and those competitors become rivals when group members start to elevate each other in perceived importance and start treating each other as though they are a threat to their success. It's also important to note that multiple rivals can exist. When this happens, you typically have people who identify 2 or 3 or more different rivals. You have your primary rival, your secondary rival, and then your tertiary, and so on. Number of competitors that are considered rivals. Now, there's a few things that rivalry can do that is important to consider in the streaming space. One, it can increase consumption, which helps everybody out, but it also can increase derogation of an outgroup, the likelihood of group members to celebrate failure by an outgroup, and also a win-at-all-cost mentality, which could push the envelope on ethical considerations when we're looking at the keeping up with the Joneses phenomenon. Now, for this analysis, we looked at two main areas. The first was intellectual property and original content. So here are a few examples of companies that have spent large amounts of capital for content. In 2021 alone, NBC Universal spent $500 million for The Office so they could show it and feature it on Peacock. Now, it's worth noting that NBC Universal created The Office. However, The Office was being streamed on Netflix, so they had to purchase it back from Netflix. Warner Media paid over $400 million for Friends so they could feature it on HBO Max. And because they no longer had The Office, Netflix paid over $500 million for Seinfeld so they could have it on their streaming service. Another aspect of this is competitors deciding to retain and create their own original content for their own libraries rather than source those out or negotiate so that content can appear on different services. Some of the popular originals that we've seen within the last 2 or 3 years on Disney Plus, you have The Mandalorian from the Star Wars lore, and then you have WandaVision from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Netflix has Stranger Things and Black Mirror, and Amazon Prime has Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. All content that has been extremely successful for those streaming brands. And rather than negotiating and having those or that content shown on a different service, those brands are deciding to keep that content on their platforms. Where this comes into play, or why this is important, is we may start to see more and more original content being purchased back or being held so that it will become more important that streaming services are creating their own content rather than paying to feature another properties or another studio's content on their services. The last thing with intellectual property and original content is these services and these brands are also in intense competition over acquiring rights to original content. So much so that brands and companies are changing strategies so that they can prepare for trying to find original content and trying to work with companies to create that original content. A case in point is the Walt Disney Company restructuring a lot of their entertainment segment or sector to focus more on Disney Plus and their streaming performance. The second thing we looked at in the analysis paper was the impact of streaming on home and movie theater entertainment. So first, with home entertainment, we have been seeing for many years, and the pandemic really only spurred this on potentially, a shifting focus from terrestrial to streaming entertainment. And companies have been trying to keep up with this. As I said, they have been restructuring their entertainment sectors to try and meet these goals or meet these needs. But are we going to see what's the next 4 or 5 years going to look like in home entertainment? And a really important thing here also is the inclusion of live sports. And what you see with the NFL and the latest negotiations they had with major networks, each of those negotiations and each of those deals, including streaming opportunities, and then also the NHL and their agreement with the Walt Disney Company, where they're going to be showing more games on ESPN Plus, ESPN, and ABC. Then we look at the movie theater and the impact that streaming will have on the movie theater. First, we look at release strategy. So we have, over the pandemic, we saw Universal release Trolls World Tour straight to streaming for a rental fee. And it performed very, very well. Because of that performance, they made statements about how they were potentially going to shift their release strategy, which ultimately led to new negotiations with several movie theater chains. And then we've also seen straight to streaming as a strategy. Disney Plus did this many times during the pandemic. Two of the biggest examples were Hamilton, that they released over the July 4th weekend in 2020, and then Soul, which released on Christmas Day in 2020. Warner Media took a different strategy where they did a simultaneous release for their entire 2021 slate. So all of the movies that were being released by Warner Media, now people had the choice and the option to go to the theater or to watch those movies on HBO Max. And that's included in the fees for HBO Max. So they're not paying something extra. Now, Disney Plus has done something similar, except they have added this premium access. So it's almost a mix of what Universal did with Trolls World Tour and what HBO Max is doing with their 2021 slate. So this means that when a movie is released, such as Mulan, Raya and the Last Dragon, they're also going to do this with Cruella and Black Widow, that people could either decide to go see these movies in the theater, or they could pay to see the content on Disney Plus for premium access. And so a final way that we discuss how streaming could potentially influence the future of movie theater entertainment is the renegotiation of release dates, release times and strategy, or even the potential for studios to have full control over their release strategy now. And this comes into play because in August 2020, the Paramount ruling was overturned, which basically meant that studios could not have complete control over their distribution. They had to distribute their movies and their products through movie theaters. And that's where we get the movie theater release and then the window after the movie theater release before something comes out on digital or Blu-ray, and then ultimately streaming. When that was overturned, now companies have full control over the way that they want to distribute their products. Will this, or how will this impact the future of movie theater entertainment? And a very interesting question is, could we potentially see a movie studio purchase theater chains to show their products and to show their movies exclusively in those theater chains? And if that starts happening, then where's the negotiation between the movie studios where to deal with distribution, where, for example, maybe you have Netflix owning a movie theater chain, and for the first 2 weeks, their movies are only in those theater chains. And then after that, are they negotiating with other theaters and other brands to be able to show those movies in other theater chains? These are all questions that really have accelerated vastly during the pandemic. This was always something that was going to happen, but analysts are saying the pandemic really sped things up by 3 or 4 years, if not more. Now, we end the analysis with a call for future investigation. There's a few things that we need to do. First, because the competition is so new and these rivalries are budding and some of them evolving, as I said, we need to look more at which brands do consumers consider rivals. And also, how does a consumer choose preferred brands? So is it a tiered system? Do consumers have 3, 4, 5 different streaming services? Or are they really looking at only having 1 or 2? Because if that's the case, then what do the streaming services need to do to stay competitive in the eyes of the consumer? Further, we need to understand consumer preferences regarding traditional versus streaming distribution. It seems as though people are responding well to streaming distribution. As I said, it's been trending that way for several years. And so trying to better understand that can help brands and companies plan for the future. And then finally, we need to monitor consumer preferences and rivalry variables such as price, content, competition for personnel over time to see how preferences change, and also to see how competition and rivalry can impact these decisions that consumers are making and the strategic decisions that brands are making over time. I hope this spurs more discussion and spurs more questions. And please reach out to me if you have questions or you want to discuss more of these strategic decisions making, or if you think that I've missed anything, overlooked anything that could be important to the future of streaming competition. Thanks a lot and have a great day.